and welcome back to BHookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and in this tutorial I'm going to demonstrate how to crochet the simple swirl embellishment. This is a free pattern that's available at BHookedCrochet.com. You can get the link to that pattern in the description below. This pattern can be used with any size yarn and any size hook that coordinates. For this tutorial, I'll be using a worsted weight yarn and a size 5mm hook. To begin our swirl embellishments, we just need to start off with a slip knot. And chain 3. Now we're going to be working with half double crochet stitches for now, and we're not going to count these 2 chains here as a stitch. We're going to use the first chain as the foundation for our ring. So what I need for you to do is make 8 half double crochet stitches into the first chain. And that's going to finish up round 1. So for those of you who are comfortable with making the magic ring, you can also start off this pattern with a magic ring with 8 half double crochets. Since we're not counting those first 2 chains as a stitch, we're just going to ignore them. So for round 2, what we want to do is increase, and we're going to do that by making 2 half double crochets into every stitch. But we only want to use the back loop only. So just that loop right here. So make your first half double crochet into your first stitch there in that back loop. And since we're working in a spiral fashion, I find that it's easiest to keep track of things by marking your first stitch with a stitch marker. Now make another half double crochet into that same stitch. Now finish off the round by making 2 half double crochets into every stitch. Now at the end of round 2, you should have a total of 16 stitches. Moving on to round 3, we want to first remove our stitch marker for just a moment, and we're going to make 1 half double crochet into the first stitch. Now go ahead and replace your stitch marker, and then make 2 half double crochets into the next stitch. 1 half double crochet into the next, and 2. So that's our repeat sequence. We're just going to make 1 half double crochet, then 2 half double crochets. So if you've been increasing correctly, you should end up with 2 half double crochets into the last stitch. So the stitch right before your stitch marker. And you'll have a total of 24 stitches at the end of round 3. So we have one more round to complete the base of our swirl. So remove your stitch marker, make 1 half double crochet into the first stitch. And again, we're just working in those back loops. And I'll explain why later. Once you make your first stitch, don't forget to add your stitch marker and make 1 half double crochet into the next stitch as well. Then 2 half double crochets into the next. So our repeat for this round is 1 half double crochet, 1 half double crochet, and then 2. So again, this is just the standard increasing in the round that we're working on here. So once again, if you have been increasing correctly, you'll end up with 2 half double crochets in your very last stitch. Okay, so now we can remove our stitch marker. We won't be needing that anymore. So what we've done here is created the base for our swirls. And at this point, we're going to move on and start working on the 3D effect that we have for our swirls. Now the cool thing about this pattern is that it's all worked in one continuous piece. So from here, let's go ahead and chain 2. And we're going to turn our work like that. So we're looking at the bottom side now. Now from here it's really simple. We're just going to make 1 double crochet into each of the stitches. And we're going to be working in that back loop only. We're going to start off with the first stitch. So I've got my chain 1 here, my chain 2 right there. I'm going to work in this first stitch in that back loop. And we want to do this for 56 stitches. So now you kind of get the idea of how we're creating this look. So if you look at it from this angle, you can see the loop that we left out when we were only working in the back loop only, when we were making this bottom piece of our swirl. And so if you follow the line of what we're working on, it's going to spiral all the way to the middle, just in a continuous circle. And since we're not increasing anymore, adding extra stitches, our ends will stand up, or these little edges that we're creating will stand up just like this. And so it's going to create a 3D embellishment that's as tall as your double crochets are. So once you get through that first outer piece, it gets a little bit more difficult to find the loops to work into if you were to keep your work pointed up like this. So what I usually do is just fold that down out of my way, and then I can see the loops that I need to work into very clear, just right there in front of me. And I wouldn't worry too much about stretching it out and disrupting the shape any. So it actually bounces back pretty easily. So all you're going to do, as I mentioned before, is work until you've made 56 double crochets. Once you've made it through 56 double crochets, your swirl should look something like this. Now we're going to transition into half double crochets. So we're going to continue using the same loops that we're familiar with for our stitches, but instead of using the double crochet, we're going to use the half double crochet. Okay, so we're going to do that for 17 stitches. Once you've made your 17 half double crochets, we're going to transition now to single crochets. And we want to make one single crochet into the next 6 stitches. So again, we're still working in those loops just like we're familiar with. And we're just going to make a single crochet into each one of the next 6. Now the last thing we want to do to complete our swirls is make a slip stitch in that last stitch. So our 6th single crochet actually occurred in our last stitch, and so we're going to make a slip stitch into that stitch as well. Now we're ready to bind off, and we'll weave in our ends. Now I want to talk about what we need to do with this end here, because if we just leave it as it is, it doesn't have quite as cool of an effect. So we want to take your darning needle and thread that, and then if you open up the ring here in the middle, you'll see the opening. Just drop your darning needle in that opening and pull it through, and then we'll pull it kind of snug. So see how that looks a little bit better there? It kind of cleans out the design a little bit. So depending on what you're going to do with your motifs, and we'll talk about that in the next section, that'll determine what you're going to do with these ends. If you're going to turn it into a motif, then you'll probably want to weave them in. But if you're just using it as an embellishment that you're going to sew onto a hat or something like that, honestly, all you need to do is tie these two ends together. And if you wanted to weave them in, what I would recommend is weaving them around this first ring of stitches. Now that finishes up our simple swirl embellishment. I mentioned in the previous clip that we can turn this into a motif or a square, and we can make an afghan out of a bunch of these motifs with these swirls on them. I've actually seen it done before and it looks really cool. So let's talk about how you might accomplish that. So we're going to turn this one into a square, but know that you could turn this into a hexagon with a little bit of adjustments. So if you count the number of stitches starting from here, going all the way around and stopping at this one here, there are 32 stitches. And the most important thing when turning a round piece like this into a square is that we have to work in a multiple of 4. And that's probably the obvious because squares have 4 sides. So if we take the total number of stitches, which we've just determined was 32, and we divide that by 4, then that means we need to have 8 stitches for each side of the square. So first what we want to do is decide where we need our corners to be. And I like to mark this with stitch markers because it makes it a little bit easier for me. So what I did here was I started at the very first stitch there. I count that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So place your second stitch marker in the 8th. Then we start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Put the stitch marker in the 8th. Start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's the last stitch marker. And then just for good measure, we'll count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So every stitch that has a stitch marker is where we're going to create a corner. Now once that is all straightened out, go ahead and grab your contrasting color, and we want to work so that the swirl embellishment is right side facing towards you. I'm going to go ahead and remove this first stitch marker and simply place my hook in that loop and bind on. So just for this very first corner, we're going to work it a little bit differently because we have to have a starting chain. So we're going to create 5 chains, and that's going to represent 3 chains as 1 double crochet and then 2 chains for the corner. So we'll make 2 double crochets in that same stitch, and that corner is almost complete. We're actually going to finish it when we make it to the other side. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We're not quite done with that one. And make 1 double crochet into each of the remaining stitches until you've reached your stitch marker. So when you've reached that stitch marker, we're going to create a corner. So in that stitch, we want to make 2 double crochets, then chain 2, and make 2 more double crochets in that same stitch. And that's going to complete this corner. Now make 1 double crochet into the next stitches until you've reached the other stitch marker. And now you'll just want to create your corner the same as before. Okay, so that is the repeat for turning this swirl into a motif. For the corner, we'll make 2 double crochets, chain 2, and 2 double crochets. So go ahead and finish up your square. So this round, we're working it the same as what we did these first 2 sides. We'll meet back up when we get to the end here to talk about how we're going to finish it off. So off camera, I finished crocheting up my 2 sides. I made my last double crochet into my last stitch of the swirl, and now I'm ready to finish off this corner here. So all we really need is 1 more double crochet in the corner, but we want to work it in the same stitch that the others are coming from. Now to finish things off, we'll just make a slip stitch into the chain space. And then we simply bind off. And then we'll just weave in those ends later. So this is something really cool that you can do with this swirl embellishment, is turn it into a motif, so that way you can turn this into anything. You can make a really neat afghan out of this design, or you can do a pillow cover, you can do some kind of handbag or purse if you have the right kind of yarn. And I mean, really, the sky's the limit. You can do some really cool things. I'd love to see what you're working on and how you're using this motif. So feel free to tag me on a picture on my Instagram account or on my Facebook page. Feel free to share your photos there. I'd love to see what you're working on. This concludes our video demonstration for the simple swirl embellishment. On behalf of BHookedCrochet.com, I'm your host, Brittany. Stay tuned for more free patterns and video tutorials at BHookedCrochet.com.